Hi everyone, my name is Mariana Singh and I'm an associate here at CAQH CORE. Welcome to our tutorial on the CAQH CORE report on attachments, a bridge to a fully automated future to share medical documentation. Convening the industry to solve challenges related to healthcare administration has always been a critical goal for CAQH CORE and has been demonstrated through publication of 5 phases of operating rules to develop consistent business processes. For attachments, we have maintained a focus on this topic over the last several years. Collaborating with more than 250 organizations, we have hosted a 5-part webinar series on attachments, providing education to the industry on technical standards and implementation experiences. Recording of those webinars can be found on our website, which is www.caqh.org. In May 2019, CAQH CORE published a white paper examining challenges associated with the exchange of medical information used for healthcare administrative transactions and identifying opportunity areas to support and accelerate industry adoption of electronic attachment transactions. The white paper is available on our website and can be accessed via the links on this slide. CAQH CORE conducted an environmental scan, which consisted of stakeholder interviews via phone, surveys, and on-site visits. Findings from environmental scan led to the identification of 5 opportunity areas that can help support and accelerate industry adoption of electronic attachment transactions by creating a more uniform approach. These findings, which are encapsulated in the attachments white paper, are grouped into 5 opportunity areas: workflows, data variability, exchange mechanisms, infrastructure, and lastly, resources. I'll be providing details on each of these opportunity areas over the course of the next several slides, and will highlight the current state of the industry as well as recommended approaches to resolve identified challenges. Attachment workflows drive a significant burden for providers and health plans. Our environmental scan identified 2 significant industry challenges related to addressing attachment workflows. The first challenge was being the persistence of manual workflows, and the second covering solicited and unsolicited attachment workflows. Health plans are faced with significant operational burden with managing attachments received via manual methods from collection, processing, scanning, reviewing, and storage of paper documents. And nearly 80% of attachments are received via this method. As web portals and other services exist to manage claims or prior authorization submissions, many of these portals do not have the capability to accept electronic attachments, and providers have to resort to using a manual method to send the additional documentation. As a result, providers are faced with a disconnect and frustration in having to use 2 different methods to facilitate the exchange of information. As the industry transitions to electronic attachments, effective attachment workflows need to be in place across all stakeholders involved in the attachment exchange to ensure success. There are 2 common types of electronic attachment workflows. This slide visually highlights 2 types of workflows. The solicited workflow is a multi-step process and is designed to ensure inbound documentation is a better match with what the health plan needs to adjudicate, meaning providers are sending the exact information that is needed by health plans to adjudicate this claim without sending unnecessary, incorrect, or wrong information. In the solicited claim attachment electronic workflow, the provider submits a claim, the health plan then sends a request for the information, and the provider sends back the appropriate information via either the CDA or a PDF. The challenge identified by providers with this workflow is that the solicited process does not occur in real time, often resulting in a pending response that is awaiting review by a health plan. The time frame in which process transpires varies and causes uncertainty and delays in revenue cycle and sometimes patient care. In an unsolicited workflow, which is depicted on the bottom, a provider submits an attachment concurrently with the associated claim or prior authorization. The challenge with this workflow as identified by health plans is that often providers submit too much, too little, or the wrong type of information, causing burden and delays in the processing of a transaction. And going beyond fee-for-service transactions, as care delivery shifts to value-based, the industry needs to be cognizant of attachment workflows in order to support care coordination in real time. To address workflow challenges, CAQH CORE identified 4 recommendations for the industry in order to promote meaningful electronic attachment workflows. The first recommendation would be to enhance unsolicited workflows by embedding documentation lookup requirements across all use cases, meaning that at the time of submitting a claim or prior authorization, a provider would know exactly which documentation to send along with the transaction, alleviating any guesswork or unnecessary manual processes. The second recommendation would be to encourage real-time information exchange for solicited processes. This would bring value to providers and health plans to ensure information is being exchanged in a timely manner, also important for value-based care. The third and fourth recommendations address industry engagement and education around workflows to ensure stakeholders have the knowledge, tools, and resources in place to make workflow improvements. Data variability is the degree to which data shared between parties diverges from the expected structure. Data may be non-uniform in specific dimensions of file format or size, for example, or data may diverge from the expected norm in its submission pattern, naming conventions, or use of metadata. We identified 2 industry challenges related to data variability. The first is reassociation of attachments to an administrative transaction, such as a claim. The second is the use of unstructured file types like images or PDFs. In relation to reassociation, when attachments are not submitted in parallel with their companion transaction, as is the case in the solicited claim attachment workflow that I walked through earlier, the attachment and transaction must be linked or reassociated. Given the scale of inbound attachment operations at health plans, matching an attachment to the correct administrative transaction can present a challenge. Also, while many transactions are now automated, most attachments arrive as paper documents, meaning the matching process often requires some level of human intervention. Sometimes attachments are unreadable by the health plan due to poor quality in printing, faxing, or due to errors in OCR. These and other issues can cause breakdowns in the attachment workflow. An unreadable attachment may result in the inability to reassociate documentation with a companion administrative request, or may lead to pending requests and delays in adjudication. However, an electronic workflow inherently brings significant improvements because its transactions can be flagged with a reference number to facilitate reassociation. The chart on this screen highlights the various attachment data formats that are processed and received by health plans, vendors, highlighting variability in file types. For health plans, PDF and image files make up more than 50% of received data formats, and more than 2/3 of attachments received by health plans are saved in an unstructured file format. In order to support transitions to more automated electronic attachment workflows, health plans emphasize the need for wide adoption and support for structured file types such as the CDA. To address challenges with the variation in data for attachment transactions, we have identified 3 recommendations for industry consideration. The first recommendation would be to explore the value of potential operating rules to streamline how attachments should be linked to companion transactions, such as claims or prior authorizations, via defining metadata requirements for reassociation. The second recommendation ensures attachment metadata, such as patient identification, data elements, for example, is accurate and consistent across information exchanges. The recommendation specifically aims to have industry consider defining predetermined data sets that could be used across all use cases and exchange methods. And the third recommendation is to encourage the industry to coalesce on around identifying requirements on file types, sizes, and formats to use for attachment data. This would help to address challenges around quality, readability, and size efficiency of additional documentation exchange. Exchange mechanisms refer to the means of how information is transported from provider to payer. Generally, these methods encompass manual methods, which include mail and fax, partially electronic methods such as uploads via health plan portal or other proprietary solutions, and fully electronic transmissions. I would also like to mention that the wait for a federally adopted electronic attachment standard has led to a proliferation of options for attachment exchange, leading to development of web portals and proprietary services. This has created a challenge for the industry by enabling a multitude of exchange options with no one common and standardized method to share information electronically. Only a small number of health plans have an electronic submission method available for providers. According to findings from the 2017 CAQH Index, only 6% of attachments are being sent through electronic methods. Although low, pockets of electronic attachment adoption have been identified. Most of the health plans participating in the environmental scan indicated that they are planning to or are already piloting capabilities to support at least one electronic exchange method to automate the request and submission of attachments between health plans and providers. Several of these electronic standards include the X12277 RFAI. This electronic transaction is used by a health plan and sent to a provider to communicate and request the type of additional documentation that may be needed to adjudicate a claim. The X12275, this electronic transaction can be used by a provider to exchange the additional documentation, such as a CDA or PDF, to a health plan in response to the 277 RFAI. And finally, FHIR, the Fast Healthcare Interoperability Resources, is a draft standard describing data formats and elements, and an application programming interface for exchanging electronic health records in a readily available, discoverable, and understandable environment. To address challenges to standardize attachment exchange methods, CAQH CORE identified two opportunity areas for the industry to consider. For electronic methods, the first recommendation would be to consider the use of industry standards to facilitate how electronic information should be exchanged and structured. For example, requirements for using web services could be beneficial to establish a base of how systems should connect and exchange information, or consider the need to standardize how attachment information should be transported and formatted, such as by pairing the 275 transaction with the PDF or CDA, or alternatively, using HL7 FHIR with a CDA. The second recommendation focuses on web portals, which is an exchange method that continues to have a strong presence. It is worth considering ways to bring greater uniformity and consistency to web portal transactions. CAQH CORE drafted a web portal for the PA transaction as there was a business need for alignment of web portal requirements. The fourth opportunity area is infrastructure, which refers to the fundamental instructions that every data exchange system needs to work, such as how to connect with other machines, negotiate security, protocols, and the basic expectations for each transaction. Our environmental scan identified three key challenges related to ensuring foundational infrastructure is in place prior to implementing electronic attachment. The first challenge identified is the lack of clinical and administrative system integration. The second is the lack of communication, and the third challenge is time frame variability. Attachments uniquely combine data from two disparate systems, clinical and administrative. For example, providers may use a practice management system to generate a claim or prior authorization, but then may have to pull clinical information from an electronic health record. From our interviews, many providers reported a lack of administrative and clinical system integration. For implementation of electronic transactions to be successful, stakeholders must work to resolve these interoperability challenges by establishing common rules for how systems connect, share, and secure data. Once systems can connect and share data, communication becomes vital. When information is exchanged, the communication should be acknowledged. Oftentimes, providers are left in the dark, not knowing if the information sent was successfully received. Findings from our environmental scan show that health plans acknowledge the receipt of attachments only 25% of the time. The inability to communicate Acknowledgements may lead to resubmissions of additional documentation, phone calls, or necessary follow-ups that lead to increased burden. In looking at timeframes to adjudicate an attachment, stakeholders do not have common expectations for turnaround times. Most providers interviewed for the environmental scan indicate that delays in adjudication of claims related transactions with attachments have not delayed patient care. But in the case of prior authorization, one behavioral health provider indicated that patient care was delayed in about 40% of cases as a result of additional documentation requests. If we move to the next slide, we can see that although response times vary greatly across exchange modes, use of electronic attachments shortens adjudication timeframes dramatically. During our environmental scan, we asked providers to estimate adjudication timeframe for attachment-related transactions. On average, providers reported that it takes health plans 44 days to adjudicate a claim with attachments sent by mail, 16 and a half days by fax, 5 days by portal, and 2 days by EDI. Timeframes for adjudication are 22 times faster when using electronic methods over mail. On this slide, I would like to point out that all prior phases of the CAQH CORE operating rules address key infrastructure needs for each transaction the rules support. In addressing infrastructure challenges related to attachments, the same common infrastructure requirements apply and can be summarized into the two recommendations listed on this slide. First, the need for common connectivity and security frameworks so systems are able to connect and share data. Second is the need for operating rules for acknowledgments, response time, and system availability to ensure systems are securely open to the exchange of electronic attachments and that communication needs are being met. Our last opportunity area is resources. Resources are a single source of truth utilities maintained for the use of industry by a trusted party, capable of facilitating collaboration and driving consensus among parties. Stakeholders participating in our environmental scan identified two recurring challenges related to resources, the first being non-uniform documentation requirements, and the second being the lack of transparency. The variability and lack of transparency in health plan attachment policies and the frequency in which policy changes occur pose an administrative challenge for providers and vendors. Providers reported that documentation requirements change and are non-uniform from plan to plan, or even within the same plan, as various insurance products from the same plan have different requirements. For example, to obtain approval for certain procedure or claim, one health plan may request to see an image or radiograph, while another may request progress notes. And vendors state that non-uniformity and lack of transparency makes it more difficult to develop, support, and maintain solutions that support electronic attachments exchange. In the case of attachments, the need for common resources and tools to be shared among users is important. We have identified two recommendations that will build greater transparency and uniformity with documentation requirements for attachments. The first recommendation we see calls for the creation of a standard companion guide so that requirements are outlined and structured with a uniform flow and format across all health plans. This would reduce burden and ease application system developed for electronic attachment solutions. The second recommendation calls for building transparency and identifying common services that often require additional documentation, since having this information defined and available helps improve the overall attachment workflow. This concludes our tutorial on the CAQH CORE report on attachments. If you have questions or require additional information, feel free to contact us at core@caqh.org. Thank you.